Hey there everyone, this is ZNote of ZNoteTaku. Well, I put out the call for questions on my 2-year channel anniversary, and you all did not disappoint. Here are the questions that you've all submitted, and I'll be including timecodes in the video's description if you want to jump to something without sifting through the entire video a second time. With all that said, let's get to it. Corner Twist asks, would you rather have a rigid, set structure while making a review, or would it be more loose and depend on the show in question? Loose. Absolutely. I abhor the idea of a one-size-fits-all model of reviewing something when media itself is so varied and distinct. The stuff that I post for my YouTube channel is honestly a fraction of the writing that I do compared to, say, AniList, so while not every piece of writing I do makes it to video format, a glance at my written work will show that I have no strict criteria when it comes to creating a print review. The worst example of a set structure for reviewing that I see is what I call template reviewing, where someone has the various properties of a show divided into neat little categories with all of their own ratings that are supposed to add up to 10 or 100 or whatever number that they've established as their maximum. The problem with this form of reviewing is that, whether intentionally or not, it makes someone think of the various pieces of a work as separate from one another because it has no sense of flow from one thought to another. Whether a work is good, bad, or in the middle, all the various properties inform and interweave with one another. How well they do or do not do varies from media to media, and as such, each review must carry its own distinct identity. Different things require different approaches and different writing goals and articulations. I could never apply the same approach to do-it-yourself that I did for Tsurune Season 2 or Hikari no O. Do you listen to City Pop? If yes, then what's your favorite album? Sorry to disappoint, but I don't. Got any recommendations? Raging Bull asks, boobs or ass? There's only one justifiable answer, and it's watch Prison School. Kino Kant RBD asks, thoughts on reading and doing videos related to visual novels and light novels? While the entry barrier to both are tough, I think they both offer a vast range of interesting and substantial storytelling that deserves more recognition. I agree. Though the main thing that's stopping me is precisely what you just said, the barrier of entry to both. I have sadly not played that many visual novels or read that many light novels, and I therefore do not feel comfortable in my own understanding of them to be able to give them their proper attention. I am not opposed to the idea of possibly playing or reading them for the purposes of video making in the future, but as for right now, my knowledge is too insubstantial regarding them. For the visual novels that I have indeed played and read, I doubt anything that I could say would be new or interesting enough to add to what has already been said. And to me, if I have nothing new to say, then my heart just wouldn't be in it, and I feel like you'd be able to notice. Trout asks, how many mini marshmallows do you put in your hot chocolate? However many it takes to make me forget the misery that is winter. Do you have any cats, or would you like to get one? I never had any pets growing up, and still have not had one. My mother has a cat allergy, so getting a cat as a child was out of the question, and my dad had a lot of pets growing up and was basically done with the idea of taking care of them. I do like cats though. I wouldn't mind getting a pet at some point in my life, but not now. Maybe one day if I'm fortunate enough to get a house. M Meaningless Name asks, what is the cutoff for submitting questions? How many marshmallows can you fit in your mouth?
11d6.
Trout interjects by asking, more important, how many marshmallows are you hiding under your mattress?
At 147 fluffy puff marshmallows.
Peppo asks, do the soundtracks of shows affect what you think of it, or do you view the show and the soundtrack as two separate parts? This is kind of going off Corner Twist's question, but it depends. For some shows like Healer Girl or Review Starlight or something else more musically inclined as a genre requirement, the soundtrack most definitely plays a more proactive role in establishing tone, characterization, etc. But a show does not need to be a music anime in order to have its soundtrack be a force within its storytelling. Tsurune Season 2 had a great soundtrack, meditative and ruminative with inspiration from stylings in minimalism and trance. Ashita no Naja, despite not being a music anime in the strictest sense, had music both as a device within the plot and boasted a wonderfully orchestrated soundtrack to boot. And then you get something like Infinite Revias, where its soundtrack is so weird and off-kilter that listening to it becomes one of the defining features of viewing the show, even though it has no plot relevance. So, yeah, it really depends on the show itself. TBDN asks, for adaptations for which you've both read the manga and watched the anime, do you tend to always prefer one medium over the other, or is it whichever you prefer typically in a case-by-case basis? Bonus, are there any for which you've done both and loved one and hated the other? It's case-by-case, but most of the time, I find that both the original manga and anime versions of stories are on par with one another since the general essence of everything is the same. I don't mind incidental changes in the conversion of print to screen nearly as much as I know others might, especially since the decisions that have to go into bringing printed material to life are far more numerous than I think we assume them to be. But I do have to confess that I've watched a lot more anime than I've read manga, so I do need to disclaim that for the sake of being upfront. As for things where I've experienced both versions and loved one and hated the other, well, I cannot say hate, but the anime adaptation of Onisama A is vastly superior to the original manga. The Dragon Ball manga tends to flow better, especially since Toriyama Akira had more or less codified how to create smoothness between panels and battle sequences. The KyoAni adaptation of Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid is a lot more fun than its original source material and actually tones down its content. And I find Rintaro's X film to be a far more engaging work than the original Clamp manga. Also, the X film is just in general rather different from the Clamp manga in most respects anyway, so I guess that's an example of really, really stark differences, but whatever. And speaking of Clamp, while I do love both, I do greatly prefer the Madhouse anime adaptation of Cardcaptor Sakura over its manga. Matcha asks, there's a lot of anime that have come out over the years, so many that often they slip through the cracks. Has there been a moment in your time of watching anime you learn about a show or movie's existence and you are unconvinced it's real until you watch it? I'd say that I tend to find anime like that to be less a case of this cannot be real, and instead more a case of it doesn't surprise me that this exists, but what the hell is this? If anything, that sentiment is sometimes what compels me to be more inclined to see something. Hell, that's one of the reasons why I ended up watching Girls und Panzer after being told about its existence, as well as the Gundam vs. Hello Kitty ONA. Oh, and throw Cat Shit 1 in there too. I'm noticing a cat theme here. Aaron RS asks, what's an underrepresented or unimportant, but in your opinion very interesting, historical backdrop that could use the anime treatment? What do you think it could tackle through it? On the specific scale rather than age-place. Now that's an interesting question. I would actually really love to see an anime adaptation, long-form OVA series preferably, of the Garry Kasparov vs. Deep Blue chess matches. Both sets of matches if possible. The amount of information about the games, both in terms of their analyses from professionals and the written words of Kasparov and Deep Blue designer Feng Xiangshu, has the ability to provide a lot of characterization and ways of looking at those 12 games from multiple angles. As far as what it could tackle, I'm especially drawn to the impact that the matches had on the psychologies of both Kasparov and the Deep Blue team, as each one desperately tried to outthink the other with the weight of the world's eyes on their games. Kasparov carried the torch for human ingenuity in chess, IBM carried their hope as a company wanting to see their stocks rise from the games, and Xiangshu's passion project for computer chess research and development all coalesced into these 12 games. In regards to more specifics, I would want to see Kasparov envision Deep Blue as an actual character, something that he could have these kinds of cryptic conversations with about what chess means as a game in the cross space between humanity and machine, perhaps even having wildly surreal imagery of chess pieces turning into mini-computers. They could electrocute Kasparov when he touches them, which could represent his hesitancy to play a move because he was paranoid Deep Blue saw something on the board that he didn't. Leave the physical form of Deep Blue unchanged. Have it remain as the giant black rectangular prism akin to the monoliths from 2001: A Space Odyssey, to represent its imposing, encroaching presence and dominion over Kasparov. Since chess is a slow game, have the animation be extremely smooth, but fiddle with speed and camera movements in moments like Game 6 of the rematch when Deep Blue played Knight takes e6. Play around with the depiction of sweat and physical tics, and don't be afraid to let the background go completely dark and just leave the characters sitting in the middle if they need a lot of time to contemplate. Keep the soundtrack to a minimum, except perhaps for clock-like music. To put it another way, make the world of the board and the characters within it so all-consuming to the senses. That way, as each agonized minute drags by, we feel the agony of both Kasparov and the Deep Blue team. Granted, I've only thought of this off the top of my head, but I think that a depiction of this while not being afraid to get disquietingly surreal could be a great thing to try. I have two more, but they're dumber. Look, whatever they are, they can't be any worse than some of the questions my students have asked me. And you know some of the things my students have asked me. Which kind of story or arc do you think anime shies away from the most? Let's say out of Tobias's 20 plots for ease. Why do you think it is? Probably plot number 15, Forbidden Love. The main reason why is that, it seems at least, that anytime the idea of a forbidden love or a taboo relationship is depicted in anime, it often seems to come tinged with some sort of comedy angle in order to make the overall story more palatable, for the purposes of making you laugh. It somewhat reads as antithetical to the very intention of characters contemplating breaking a social taboo, and for which there is supposed to be an underlying sense of revulsion in the audience. When I say this, I don't mean that these stories cannot have comedy. If that were the case, there's no way I could justify my adoration of some of my favorite anime that deal with this topic. Rather, it's the idea that the comedy is poorly suffused within the material because it doesn't quite know how to turn the comedy off. This is why so many inseki or step-sibling will-they-won't-they anime tend to be so dull. They misbalance the absurdity of the situation with hijinks versus the fact that the characters are actively considering this forbidden thought that's preoccupying their emotions. To put it another way, if the show is asking me to buy a social taboo as acceptable for this particular story, constantly making jokes to soften the blow doesn't really help. Say what you will about I'm in love with my sister or Yosuga no Sora, but at least they played their incest plot straight and didn't shy away from the emotional consequences of it all. Keep in mind also that I am deliberately excluding hentai from this discussion because, whether softcore or not, those tend to place so much focus on the sexual gratification of the viewer and the actual elongation of sex that it comes at the expense of any actual exploration of the forbidden love concept. What anime setting or cast would become mega interesting if it just became a murder mystery whodunit? It would be incredibly messed up but wild if Hyoka actually had a murder mystery that Oreki tried figuring out, or if there was a drive-by shooting mystery in Initial D, or maybe even a sports anime. Or if you really wanted to throw something into the deep end, let it happen in a Love Live series. Let the murder be horribly gory, and have the eventual trial be a musical of the prosecution and defense pleading their case in song. Keep the idol pop genre music aesthetic intact, but have the lyrics play the murder mystery and investigation aspect completely straight. Emma asks, how long will I wait?
One eternity later.
Catmoon asks, what's the best wardrobe you've ever seen from an anime? That's tough. I don't know whether I would call them the best, but I love the wardrobes from Hyoka, Licorice Recoil, Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, Onisama E, and Violet Evergarden. Casual Anime Enjoyer asks, how and why did you start writing reviews? I started writing reviews back in junior year of high school, mostly because I was trying to come up with a way to explain to my mother why I did not love the movie adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird starring Gregory Peck. This, in combination with getting a Netflix account and watching lots of old episodes of Siskel and Ebert, really kickstarted my desire to watch more media and try to understand what media was trying to do and how it goes about doing so. For the longest time, the reviews I wrote were purely for a small Facebook audience back when Facebook Notes was a thing, for those of you who remember what that was, and they were all rooted in the same general idea of trying to explain why I responded to something a certain way. I sometimes had people loving that I compelled them to watch the True Grit remake with Jeff Bridges, and got some very angry inbox messages for having the audacity to say that I did not like Man of Steel. Tobble asks, what's your advice for people who want to provide their insights and do reviews, but feel like they don't have anything worthwhile to contribute? I would say that, especially if you want to get started, don't concern yourself nearly so much with worrying about whether you have anything worthwhile to contribute. I'd say first and foremost, you need to get into the practice of articulating yourself. Getting your thoughts or impression out there is a key matter. Start small and build your way up from there. Some other things to keep in mind? Don't try to create a magnum opus straight away. The first bit of writing you do is probably going to suck, and that's something you just have to accept. Hell, a lot of the stuff I wrote way back then is stuff that I don't even want to look at now. It's okay to keep things simple when you're new. Spend some time actually trying to get a feel for how you process media and evaluate it. Plus, since you'll be sharing your thoughts with others, spelling and grammar also count. Time and experience will hopefully help you improve. But perhaps most importantly, if you find that it's not working, it doesn't make you any less of a person if you wish to keep your thoughts to yourself. Hell, I broadcast my thoughts for the internet, and sometimes I wonder if I myself am any good at this. Nico Zeifer asks, have you read any manga series that you think would make great anime adaptations? I feel like anything written or drawn by Tsuruta Kenji, like Memories of Eminon or Spirit of Wonder, would be prime for the OVA or film treatment, depending on the material. And yes, I know that the Miss China OVAs exist, but those are only 3 chapters of Spirit of Wonder. I would love to see his impeccable sense of backgrounds and character designs animated, though I do fear that something about the impact of them being still images versus them moving could be lost in the conversion. Or maybe I'm just being overly defensive for someone whose art style I admire. I suppose we could always get Imari to figure it out, right? Nick Victoryfire 007 asks, what anime did you think felt incomplete, or they are old but only got 1 season, or skipped stuff from the sources and they need a proper anime adaptation or full remake? Well, this is a rather common answer, but an adaptation of Berserk that handles the rest of the completed arcs with the care and attention they deserve certainly comes to mind. Others that stick out include the Haruhi franchise, though I am indeed very happy and perfectly content with the animated content that we have. And while I'm not fond of the most recent Invisible Victory season being done by Studio Zebek rather than KyoAni, you might as well finish Full Metal Panic. Hell, you released the newest installment 13 years after KyoAni's The Second Raid. You might as well finish it at that point. Yastas asks, if I can ask, which grades do you teach? I teach university students. I did about 2 weeks of student teaching back when I was in undergrad with a public school, and quickly realized that while I do like children, I could never teach them. I just don't have the personal constitution to do that. What's your favorite or most satisfying moment you've ever had while teaching? That's honestly hard to say, but if I had to offer an answer, I'd say it was when a student's family wrote me a thank you note. Without going into the full story, a student in my class was struggling to stay focused because their friend had passed away and the funeral was coming soon. Before the class gathered, I talked with the student in private and insisted that they not come to class and take the time off so that they could grieve. I also, unprompted, pushed back their due dates for the next several assignments as a gesture of good faith. Not only did the student finish all their assignments on time anyway, so the pushback wasn't even necessary, the family in their thank you note and the student themselves remarked that I was the only professor who was willing to go so out of their way to accommodate their situation. The student ended up passing the class with flying colors, and we still communicate every once in a while. This was something that I knew already, in part because of the kindness that my own university professors in undergrad had done. But the whole situation made it all the clearer that students have lives outside the classroom. It makes it all the more important to take an empathic approach when it feels warranted. Show them dignity and they'll repay it in kind. In all the semesters I've taught, I've only had 1 or 2 students who abused my good faith and lost my respect. Have you played any point-and-click, adventure, or visual novel games? What are some of your favorites if you did? This might be a nice time to say that I recently created a backlogged account where I'm tracking all the games that I've played, want to play, etc. I'll leave a link to it in the video's description. But if you want an immediate answer, I have indeed, yes. Since I've already mentioned that I've played visual novels here, but not that many, let's move on to the others that you mentioned. I have played and loved the original Myst, along with its sequel Riven, 2 great point-and-clicks. And for adventure, I still always get a kick out of Metroid Fusion, and while I do need to replay it, I loved the experience of playing Enemy Zero. Do you have a favorite anime trope? That's a tough one, but I do have to say that I'm quite partial to the Dezaki postcard memory. You get a surprising amount of dramatic versatility out of them, and they sometimes show up in more recent work. Totaram asks, how do you find time to work on videos while working as a professor? Or better yet, do you have any tips on how to not become exhausted trying to juggle both a job and YouTube? I should probably point out that being a professor is not my only job. I actually work 3 jobs total in order to make my rent because being an adjunct professor just doesn't pay enough. Because of this, time can seem like the most precious of commodities. But at least in regards to professor matters, for one, it helps that I'm teaching classes that I have already taught before, so I have about 99% of what I need already prepared long in advance, with minor tweaks or changes from semester to semester in order to keep it interesting for myself to actually teach. I don't want to fall into the rhythm of having a curriculum that never moves, because that would become very boring very quickly. But the basic through line for everything I teach is already present, so the days and months of preparations I would ordinarily need are taken care of. One other thing that ultimately makes the balance easier to achieve is that I adhere to a pretty strict sense of when to use my free time. While I obviously do not want to keep subscribers waiting for the next video, YouTube doesn't exactly put food on the table for me. As such, I have planned periods during my week where I am doing nothing but grading or handling other matters pertaining to teaching, like Zoom meetings with students or staying up to date on what's happening in the department. That way, I can spend my free time without having to worry about some specter hanging over my head, wondering why I haven't finished reading all those journal entries yet. Is this perfect? Well, no, but I have enough self-discipline that it's not an issue, even when I do happen to fall a little bit behind. The other little tip I have is that if I find myself getting exhausted, I just get away from the computer. Period. No Word documents, no anime streaming, no Discord, nothing. It's very easy to find yourself sitting down to do something, and then notice you've spent the better part of the past several hours not moving from your chair. I find that the best detox in moments like these is just walking outside, especially since there's actually a pretty nice park near where I live, or if the weather is bad, spend some time on my exercise bike. When are you going to stop throwing bricks through my window and threatening my family?
When you grow up.
Okay.
Bad Smile asks, why do you make videos without showing your face? Do you think it's not important to the message you want to send? This is honestly more a personal privacy matter than anything else. While I am not averse to talking about my personal life in certain capacities if it's to help illustrate a point or perhaps satiate a quick curiosity, I want to maintain some distance between my online presence and my real life, including how I look. Perhaps once my living circumstances get more stable, I will actually do a face reveal, but as for now, it's not something that I'm actively considering doing. And as far as the message that I'm trying to send, I don't really think that revealing my face has anything to do with talking about media analysis. Besides, people interact all the time with non-representational images on their profile pictures all the time. However, I should mention that I did promise a subscriber that if I did ever reveal my face, I would be wearing a fedora when I do. At that point, it would probably become a thing that I have to have on my head forever moving forward as part of personal branding or something. Tomi Palese, and I really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, asks, considering the fact that otaku media is generally disregarded by a lot of people as a form of low art, do you think that creating more critical and informative work on the subject, be it reviews, analyses, or any other of the sort, can have a positive impact on the perception of the medium at large? I know it might sound like saying, turn your brain off, but I sometimes wonder what's the point of taking anime so seriously. I'm actually not going to answer this right now because, honestly, this is a topic that deserves its own video and more expansion, so I do apologize if it seems like I'm putting you off, but I think it's too delicious a topic to be given a quick answer in this specific video. And that's all she wrote, folks. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions, and thank you again to everyone for watching, commenting, subscribing, clicking the bell for notifications, and following along with me on this 2-year journey. I don't think I could ever fully express how grateful I am that you all take time out of your day to listen. Here's hoping things can continue into another year. In the meantime, this has been ZNote of ZNoteTaku. Happy viewing, everyone.